Good morning. Welcome to Gimpy's History Corner, dedicated to my grandsons, Archie and Ellis, who call me Gimpy. This is video number 16, and it's How the Founding Fathers Died. Founding Fathers and the Revolutionary War is one of my favorite things to study in history. I'm going to look at when they died, how old were they, what was their health, and what was their financial situation are the areas I'm investigating. I have a lot of books to resource here. George Washington, His Excellency by Joseph Ellis. John Adams by David McCullough. Burr, Hamilton, and Jefferson by Roger Kennedy. That's a good book. I'll come back to that on another video. Benjamin Franklin by Walter Isaacson. Founding Rivals, Madison and Monroe by Chris DeRose. All of these were good books. I got a lot out of them. Hopefully you will enjoy learning this information. First of all, most of these were presidents, and we have to realize that presidential pensions did not start until 1958. When Harry Truman left the White House, he was never a rich man, and they were concerned about his end of life. And Eisenhower was the first. He and Truman and Eisenhower were the first two to receive the presidential pension. None of these other people received anything after leaving office. All right, the first founding father, of course, was George Washington, the father of our country. He died in 1799 at the age of 67. And he was living on Mount Vernon, which I visited, beautiful place. And one of his habits was getting on a horse and riding around his large estate to make sure his slaves were doing the jobs he wanted them to do. One of his beliefs was slaves will not do anything unless you tell them. So he got on the horse. It was December. It was rainy, kind of snowy, there in Virginia, along the Potomac River. He rode his horse for several hours around his estate, giving orders to his slaves in the rain and the snow. He came back, and instead of changing from his wet clothes, he went straight to dinner. What had become a tradition at Mount Vernon was people would show up to meet the great man, and usually had dinner with him. So he had cold. He spent time in the cold weather. His clothes were wet and cold, and he left them on during dinner, meeting all these people who showed up and wanted to meet the great man. He developed a sore throat, which gradually became worse. And the rest of the story today would be malpractice. Doctors at that time in history believed in bloodletting. They believed that your body was made up of humors, which were kind of magical things that made you sick or healthy. And if you were sick, that meant you had too much humor in your body, and letting blood out would make your humor levels better. Doctors did this for several days, and it's estimated that President Washington lost 40% of his blood. I gave blood the other day, and I know what that's like, but I certainly didn't give up 40% of my blood, which made him very weak. The other malpractice was the doctors blistered his throat. They put ointments and so forth on his throat that would cause it to blister, thinking that the blood would rush up to the blister and be away from the infected areas. That was their thinking. Eventually, President Washington said, "You got to quit doing this. I'm ready to die." He gave orders to not bury his body for 3 days. At that time in history, there was a belief that many people were put in the grave too early. They were actually still alive. The theory was that's what happened to Jesus. So he was buried, obviously, 4 days later at age 67. What was the financial condition of Mount Vernon? It was very well managed, probably the best managed of all these we're going to talk about. And it passed on to his wife, Martha, intact. So George Washington died at age 67 in 1799. John Adams died at age 91, which was the oldest, I believe, of the ones I'm going to talk about. Yes, he lived the longest, 91 years, died in 1826. Why is that year significant? It's after 1776, and it's 50 years after signing of the Declaration of Independence. And he died around the July 4th date. He died of heart failure at 91. It's not unusual. He was a little bit overweight all his life. He was nicknamed the Great Rotundity by his enemies. So that didn't help. Financially, he was doing very well. I've been to his house in Braintree, where he grew up and where he first married his Abigail and had his children. But he moved to a nicer home and was financially stable, actually pretty well off, but then he started investing. He got bad advice on how to invest. He invested in a London firm that he thought was really healthy, and it went bankrupt, and he lost all of his investment money. So what saved him was his son, John Quincy Adams, who later became president himself, who sold a bunch of property and investments and made his end of his life more comfortable. So John Adams, 1826, died at 91, heart failure. Thomas Jefferson also died in 1826, but he was only 83. John Adams was like a big brother to Thomas Jefferson, almost 10 years older than him. But they both died about the same time, around the 4th of July, 50 years after the Declaration was signed. Thomas Jefferson died of prostate problems. I just got back from my urologist, and I'm in good shape with my prostate. He had chronic diarrhea, kidney failure, rheumatism, and more malpractice. He had mercury poisoning because the doctors prescribed that for some of these ailments. They just didn't know any better. Thomas Jefferson died deeply in debt. He owed over $100,000 at the time, which would be well in the millions today. He had a very lavish lifestyle. I've been to Monticello. It's been refurbished. It's a wonderful place. And very poor estate management. So he was a brilliant man as far as some things go. Managing money was not his thing. So he died deeply in debt. 1836, 10 years after that, was James Madison's death. He was 80 years old. He also died of heart failure and rheumatism. He was not expected to live long. He was a very small man. Made jokes about how short he was and how unhealthy he looked all the time. But he had a long life. He lived till he was 80. Died around 1836 of heart failure and rheumatism. He also was strained financially. I've been to his estate. It's very nice. His financial problem was due to poor crop yields and mismanagement, just like Jefferson. Jefferson and Madison, neither one were good estate managers. And you have to understand, a lot of these people were gone from their estates for a long time. Of course, Washington with the war and as president. John Adams was in England and France. And the president, Thomas Jefferson, spent a lot of time in France and as president. And James Madison spent time as president. So maybe that's the reason for this mismanagement. I don't know. Ben Franklin died in 1790 at 84 years old. He was a lot older going in of most of these guys. During the Revolution, he was the older uncle, so to speak. Spent a lot of time in England and in France, and he lived a pretty lavish lifestyle. He died of pleurisy, which is a lung issue like pneumonia or lung cancer, and had lung issues complicated by obesity. You see pictures of Franklin. He always had a pot belly on him. And his final issue was lung abscess. He had substantial assets from his printing business and diplomatic positions and pensions, so he was okay financially. I've not been to his homes in Philadelphia. Alexander Hamilton had the shortest life of all of these. He died in 1804. At the age of 49, I've been to his house in New York City. It's called LaGrange. And he died in the famous duel with Aaron Burr. They had an ongoing feud going. There were two prominent attorneys in New York City. I have a book about their working together on a case. But they belonged to different political parties, different aims. They were rivals in New York City, and they used to insult each other in the newspapers and at parties. And in those days, if you were insulted, you demanded an apology. If no apology came, you challenged the person to a duel. Most of the time, those were settled, but sometimes not. Alexander Hamilton's son was killed in a duel. So they went to New Jersey, where it was not illegal to have a duel with Aaron Burr, and there's controversy as to what happened. But either way, Hamilton shot and missed. Aaron Burr shot and hit Hamilton, and he died the next day. He died with limited wealth. He earned a good living from being a lawyer, but he spent probably as fast as he earned. Like I said, I've been to his home. It's a nice mansion, so to speak, but it's been moved several times. It's not in its original location. I'll do some more on the Burr-Hamilton thing on another video. It's fascinating. Aaron Burr lived a long life. He died in 1836, long after Hamilton was shot. He was not penalized for the duel. Aaron Burr was Thomas Jefferson's vice president at the time, which gets complicated. So once he was finished being vice president, he got an idea to move west and try to round up support to do something about the Texas area. It's not clear as to what he meant to do, but he eventually was arrested by agents for Thomas Jefferson, who was president, and brought back and put on trial. So he had spent a lot of money on legal defenses. He didn't have a ton of money to start with. He was kind of like Hamilton, where he spent as fast as he made it. So he was found innocent of treason, which upset Thomas Jefferson, of course. But his health declined. He went to England for a while. He actually lived off of rich women since his wife was dead. and he died at 80. He was impoverished, physically debilitated. He had a stroke. So the end of Aaron Burr's life was not good. And again, I'll do a separate video strictly on the Hamilton-Burr duel. The last founding father I want to talk about is James Monroe, who was president after Madison. He died in 1831 at age 73 from tuberculosis and heart complications. And he was bankrupt at death. Had to sell his Virginia estate, which I've been to. He lived with relatives. And the research says that his money went from years of public service with low pay. They didn't pay much in those days. And again, poor estate management. So all three Virginia planters, or 3 out of the 4 Virginia planters, Monroe, Madison, and Jefferson, were poor managers, and they died basically broke or bankrupt. And George Washington was the only one that had a solvent estate at his death. Okay, that does it for me and the Founding Fathers' end-of-life situation as far as health and finances. Some of them might have been great men in doing what they did, but oftentimes money management was not one of their strengths. Their medical issues were made worse by bad doctoring, bad medical practices at the time, but most of them lived pretty long lives. All right, thanks a lot. Have a great day.